The problem that we now face is that mainstream policy analysts, in a broad sense, would probably agree with my description of the challenges. And while there'll be all kinds of differences about specifics, I think mainstream analysts, even with very different philosophical views and very different views on specifics, could find common ground to move forward effectively on our fiscal challenges and on all of the policy challenges I've just mentioned. The problem, however, is that the politics, as all of you know, is extremely difficult in every one of these areas. Thus, I believe that the ultimate challenge and the challenge upon which the economic future of our country depends is political will and the effectiveness of our political system. Let me end the discussion in the United States with 3 points. One, there is enormous concern amongst participants in our political system, elected officials, journalists, and others, about whether it will function effectively enough to meet the challenges that I have just described, particularly the fiscal challenges. A friend of mine who was in the Senate for many, many years, but left some years ago, told me that when he was there was intense political and partisan activity. But he said at the end of the day, most of the members had a real commitment to govern, and they would come together, and on most issues, not all issues, on most issues, they would find common ground to move forward. Now, on virtually all issues, almost all members vote unanimously against any proposal that the other party has made. And so we have we have very close to a paralysis of government, except in particular instances, and usually they're very special circumstances there. There are many structural problems, and they need to be remedied. The 60-vote rule in the Senate, for example, used to be that there would be an occasional 60-vote requirement to a filibuster. Now it's a virtual requirement for all actions except for certain budgetary matters that fall under an exemption. And then there's the Citizens United decision. Money has been a problem to begin with, and that decision is exacerbating or multiplying that problem by many multiples, and I think is going to have a significant adverse effect on governance as well as on elections. Having said all that, I believe that the most fundamental requisite for improving our political system and getting it back to the point that it needs to be at in order to meet our challenges is an issue that Thomas Jefferson identified a long time ago. And this is a very rough paraphrase, extremely rough, but the idea is right. He said that in a democracy, for elected officials to make the tough decisions, the difficult decisions that are necessary for success, those elected officials have to feel that they will be held accountable by an informed electorate. And I think that the most fundamental issue we face is having an informed electorate that will hold, that, with respect to whom our elected officials will feel they're being held accountable. And the question of having that kind of informed electorate is immensely complicated, and it goes beyond the scope of the time that we have here. But it does involve the question of the media, and that includes very much the new media. It involves the question of our elected officials, and it involves what the public is interested in, and then if you will, the mutually reinforcing cycle amongst all of those. And the need, I think, is to break through that cycle, and in one place in that cycle, convert what is now a problem into a positive, and then I think that could reverse a negative cycle into a positive one and provide the informed electorate that Thomas Jefferson identified so long ago. But how we do that's a rather complex question, to say the least, although I have some thoughts on how it might conceivably, thoughts as to what might conceivably work. Number two, I think over time we will reestablish our political effectiveness. In fact, I think there's a high likelihood. And my reasons are as follows, and I hope that's right. Our historical political resilience, the dynamism of our society, the potential that the public's loss of confidence in our political system, and 84% of the American people today say they do not have confidence in Congress, will begin to affect elections in a way that politicians will recalculate their political self-interest more toward compromise and effective governance. And finally, the possibility that the sheer weight of our economic issues will cause politicians, or elected officials rather, to behave in a different way. Third and final point with respect to the United States, we are heading into an extraordinarily important time, and probably all of you know this, but let me just repeat it very quickly. In the post-election period post-election coming up in November, the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts will expire. The payroll tax holiday will expire. The spending cuts mandated by sequestration will go into effect, and we will hit the debt limit once again. If you take all those factors together, it's been estimated that if all that happens, it will reduce GDP by about 4 to 5% of GDP, which is an immense hit for an already fragile, even if it's a somewhat recovering fragile economy to take. Parts of this are unacceptable to both parties, and parts of it, respectively, are unacceptable to one party or the other. And it seems to me that there is at least the possibility that the pressure of those events will cause or bring the parties to work together post-election, in the post-election period, that is to say lame duck and maybe 2 or 3 months into January or whatever, in order to reach some sort of constructive resolution of our fiscal issues that meets the challenges that I've described before. It's also possible that they'll simply undo all of these events through various kinds of legislative actions and then continue to kick the ball down the road. Obviously, all of us should be very intensely focused on this post-election period because I think the outcome could be very important, could very importantly set the direction for our country for really quite some time to go.